Who is she? The question cut across the firing range louder than the wind. A few men laughed near the equipment tables as the unknown woman stepped through the side gate carrying a long, weathered rifle case. She wore faded field trousers, a plain gray shirt, and boots marked with old dust. No visible unit patch. No polished insignia. Nothing that explained why she had been allowed onto one of the most restricted training ranges on the coast. Lieutenant Derek Holt watched her approach with open amusement. "She get lost on the way to base maintenance?" he asked. More laughter followed. The woman did not look at them. She crossed the concrete slowly, her left hand resting beneath the rifle case, her right hand loose at her side. She moved without hurry, but there was nothing uncertain in her steps. Her eyes passed over the range in a single sweep. The observation tower, the wind flags, the ammunition station, the distant steel targets trembling in the morning heat. She noticed everything. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and respect, hit like and subscribe. These stories inspire change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Evelyn. The Pacific wind pushed cold air across the range, carrying salt from the cliffs and the sharp scent of gun oil. 24 SEAL candidates stood near the firing line, preparing for their long-range evaluation. Most of them were young, strong, and loud enough to make sure everyone knew it. Evelyn Shaw walked past them like they were part of the landscape. She reached an empty bench and placed the rifle case down with controlled care. The metal latches opened with 2 quiet clicks. Inside rested an old precision rifle with worn black paint, a scarred stock, and a scope that had seen more use than any weapon on the range. It did not look new. It did not look impressive. To the candidates, it looked outdated. Holt stepped closer. "That thing still fires?" Evelyn lifted the rifle from the case. Her hands changed the moment they touched it. Every movement became exact. She checked the chamber, tested the bolt, examined the mount, and ran one finger along the edge of the scope. There was no wasted motion, no nervous pause. The rifle did not appear heavy in her hands. It appeared familiar. Petty Officer Mason Reed stopped loading his magazine. He had spent 2 years studying experienced shooters. He knew the difference between someone who had learned a weapon on a clean training range and someone who had trusted one when mistakes carried consequences. The other saw an older rifle. Mason saw muscle memory. Holt leaned against the next table. "You planning to teach a history lesson?" A few candidates smirked. Evelyn looked toward the farthest target, nearly hidden by heat shimmer. "No," she said. Her voice was calm, low, almost indifferent. "Then what are you doing here?" She checked the wind without looking at the flags. Instead, she watched a thin line of dust curling near the ground, then the dry grass beyond the firing line. Waiting. For what? Evelyn closed the bolt. The sound was soft, but several men stopped laughing. For someone to start paying attention. Holt's smile faded slightly. Before he could respond, the heavy door beneath the observation tower opened. Commander Nathan Cole stepped onto the range. Conversation died almost instantly. Cole was known for demanding discipline before explanations. Men straightened when he entered a room. Instructors lowered their voices. Even Holt stepped away from the table and pulled his shoulders back. The commander began walking toward the firing line. Then he saw Evelyn. He stopped. For the first time that morning, the expression on his face changed. The candidates expected irritation, perhaps confusion, maybe an order demanding to know why an unidentified woman was handling a rifle on his range. Instead, Commander Cole removed his sunglasses. His eyes settled on the faded weapon in her hands, then moved to her face. Something old passed across his expression. Recognition, respect, and something close to disbelief. He walked toward her without speaking. Holt glanced at the men beside him, still expecting the woman to be removed. Commander Cole stopped 3 feet in front of Evelyn Shaw. His boots came together. His back straightened. Then, in complete silence, the SEAL commander raised his right hand and saluted the unknown female sniper. No one moved. No one laughed. And for the first time that morning, every man on the range asked the same question. Who was she? 20 minutes earlier, Evelyn Shaw had arrived at the base in the passenger seat of an aging transport truck. There had been no black SUV waiting for her. No aide carrying classified folders. No officer standing at attention near the gate. The driver, a young logistics specialist named Parker, had picked her up from a quiet intersection outside the naval station after receiving a short message from operations. One passenger, one rifle case. No questions. Parker had expected a senior instructor. Instead, he found a woman standing alone beneath a flickering street lamp, wearing a plain gray shirt under a faded field jacket. Her dark hair, streaked lightly with silver, had been pulled into a low knot. She carried no visible rank and no luggage beyond the long case resting beside her boots. "You heading to the training range, ma'am?" Parker asked. "That's what they tell me." Her answer gave him nothing. During the drive, Parker tried twice to make conversation. Evelyn responded politely, but never with more words than necessary. She spent most of the trip looking through the window. The road curved along the coast before climbing toward the base. Beyond the wire fence, low concrete buildings stood against the pale morning sky. Watchtowers faced the ocean. Radar equipment turned slowly in the distance. A helicopter crossed above them, its rotors beating through the cold air. Evelyn watched it disappear behind the cliffs. Some habits never left. At the main gate, 2 armed guards stepped from the checkpoint booth. The older one raised a hand. Identification. Evelyn passed him a military card and a folded set of orders. The guard studied the card first. His eyes narrowed. The photograph matched. The name matched. But several lines beneath it had been covered by dark security markings. He opened the orders. More black ink. More classification stamps. The younger guard leaned over his shoulder. "What unit is she with?" The older man looked at Evelyn through the open window. "Ma'am, this paperwork doesn't list an active assignment. It lists authorization. It also leaves out almost everything else." Evelyn held his gaze without irritation. That is usually what classified means. The younger guard gave a small laugh, thinking she had made a joke. She had not. The older guard picked up the phone and called base operations. Parker rested both hands on the steering wheel, suddenly uncomfortable with the silence. Evelyn remained still. Her attention had already moved beyond the checkpoint. She noticed the camera above the barrier was angled 3 degrees too far east. The steel post near the pedestrian lane had fresh scrape marks. One of the guards had left his rifle sling twisted. A delivery van waited 20 yards behind them with its engine running. None of those details seemed important, until they were. The phone call lasted less than 30 seconds. The guard's posture changed. Not much. Just enough. "Yes, sir," he said into the receiver. He listened. Then he looked at Evelyn again, this time with less suspicion. "Understood." He returned the phone to its cradle and handed back her documents. "You're cleared." The barrier lifted. Neither guard saluted. Evelyn did not correct them. As the truck rolled forward, Parker glanced at her. "Guess someone important is expecting you." Evelyn looked toward the distant firing range. "Someone is." The truck stopped beside an equipment building near the southern edge of the base. Parker climbed out and reached for the rifle case. "I've got it, ma'am." Evelyn placed one hand on the handle before he could touch it. The movement was not aggressive, but Parker stopped immediately. "I carry my own equipment." "Yes, ma'am." She stepped down from the truck. Up close, Parker noticed the case was older than it had appeared. Its corners were dented. The hard shell had been scratched by years of transport, and 3 faded white numbers remained near one latch. The original unit markings had been removed. Not painted over. Removed. "Where do you want me to take you?" Parker asked. Evelyn looked past the buildings toward the range. "I'll walk." "That's almost half a mile." "I know." She started forward before he could answer. The base was waking around her. Mechanics rolled tool carts from hangars. Sailors crossed between barracks carrying coffee. Instructors moved toward morning briefings. Most barely looked at the woman carrying the old case. Those who did assumed she was a contractor, a technician, perhaps a former service member visiting for a demonstration. Evelyn preferred it that way. She passed the observation tower and slowed near a row of parked vehicles. From there, she could hear distant rifle fire. One shot. A pause. Another shot. The second report reached her a fraction later than the first. Evelyn looked toward the horizon. "Too much right correction," she murmured. A maintenance sailor walking nearby glanced at her. "Sorry, nothing." She continued toward the range. With every step, the sound of voices grew clearer. Young men laughing. An instructor calling distances. Metal targets ringing beyond the cliffs. Evelyn adjusted her grip on the rifle case. She had been ordered to evaluate the next generation of SEAL marksmen. But before the morning was over, She would learn something far more important than their scores. She would learn how they treated someone they believed had no power at all. The firing range had already become a contest before Evelyn reached it. Lieutenant Derek Holt stood at the center of the activity, surrounded by 3 candidates who laughed at nearly everything he said. He was 29, broad-shouldered, sharp-featured, and ranked first in the class after 6 weeks of evaluation. Everyone knew his numbers. Fastest target acquisition, best average grouping, highest confidence score from the instructors. Holt knew them too. He wore success like another piece of equipment. 800 yards, he called, settling behind his rifle. Crosswind from the west. Half value. Petty Officer Mason Reed lay 2 stations away, checking his own scope. It shifted, Mason said. Holt did not look at him. Flags haven't moved. The grass did. One of the other candidates laughed. Maybe the grass should take the shot. Holt smiled, then pressed his cheek to the stock. Downrange, a round steel target. Weighted beyond layers of heat distortion. The ocean wind moved unevenly across the open ground, strong near the firing line, weaker near the target. Holt adjusted his scope. He fired. The report cracked against the cliffs. A second later, dust jumped to the right of the target. Miss, the range officer announced. Holt lifted his head. Bad read from the spotter. Mason said nothing. That was when Evelyn entered through the side gate. At first, only a few candidates noticed her. She carried the rifle case close to her leg and moved along the rear wall, staying clear of the active firing lanes. Her field jacket was faded at the elbows. Her boots had been repaired more than once. There was no gleaming equipment strapped to her body, no tablet, no rangefinder hanging from her chest. She looked ordinary. That was enough for Holt. He watched her cross behind the benches. Who let the museum tour in? The men near him laughed. Evelyn did not turn. She stopped at an unused table and placed the case on top. Holt sat back from his rifle. Ma'am, visitor area is behind the red line. Evelyn examined the range before answering. I'm aware. Her eyes moved toward Holt's target. A faint dust cloud still hung beyond it. You missed right. The laughter faded. Holt narrowed his eyes. Range officer already called it. You corrected for the wind at your position. He stood. And you fired through 3 different wind zones. Mason looked up. That was exactly what he had tried to tell him. Holt crossed his arms. You got all that from standing back there? Evelyn unlatched the rifle case. I got it from watching the ground. The first latch clicked. Then the second. Several candidates turned fully toward her. Inside lay a rifle unlike the polished systems arranged across the line. The stock had been worn smooth in places. Scratches marked the receiver. The scope housing carried small dents along one side. One candidate leaned toward another. That thing is ancient. Probably came with her. They laughed again. Evelyn lifted the rifle with both hands. Her expression did not change. She checked the chamber, drew the bolt back, inspected the face, then released it forward. Without allowing the metal to slam. Her fingers moved naturally over the rifle, pausing at the scope mount and elevation turret. Mason watched closely. She never looked down to find a control. She already knew where everything was. Holt stepped nearer. You planning to shoot with that? Evelyn studied the worn markings along the scope. If required. Required by who? She looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were gray, steady, and unreadable. That depends on how this evaluation goes. The answer irritated him. This is a SEAL qualification range. I noticed. Candidates here earned their positions. Evelyn ran a cloth once along the bolt. Then they should not be threatened by someone cleaning a rifle. A few men looked away to hide their smiles. Holt's jaw tightened. He had expected embarrassment. Instead, she had dismissed him without raising her voice. He leaned against her table and looked down at the old weapon. What is it? Custom action? Rebuilt stock? Modified long ago. By some hunting club? Evelyn closed the bolt. The quiet metallic sound cut through the conversation around them. By people who needed it to work. Holt studied her face, searching for a reaction he could use. He found none. Behind him, another candidate called out. Maybe she's here to teach us patience. No, Holt replied. She's probably here to photograph the class. This time the laughter was louder. Evelyn looked past them toward the distant target. The wind had shifted again. She watched the shimmer bend above the sand, then glanced at the loose strap hanging from Holt's rifle bag. Your next round will miss left. Holt stopped smiling. I haven't even entered my correction. You already decided what correction to make. He stared at her. Then he returned to his firing position. "One shot," he said. "When I hit, you tell us who you are." Evelyn rested one hand on her rifle case. "And when you miss?" Holt settled behind the scope. "I won't." The candidates gathered closer. Mason looked from Holt to Evelyn. She did not appear excited by the challenge. She did not even appear interested. She simply watched the wind. Holt made his adjustment. He inhaled. The range went quiet. Then he fired. Far downrange, the steel target remained still. A thin burst of dust rose from the ground. On the left, the dust on the left settled slowly. No one spoke. Holt remained behind his rifle for another second, as if refusing to accept what the target had already confirmed. Then the range officer's voice came through the speaker. "Mississippi left edge by approximately 14 inches. A few candidates looked toward Evelyn. She had not moved. Her hand still rested on the open rifle case. Her expression unchanged. There was no satisfaction in her face. No smile. No need to prove that she had been right. Holt lifted his head from the stock. Wind changed after the shot. Evelyn looked at the flags. They moved after the shot. Mason Reed lowered his eyes to hide his reaction. The distinction was small. The embarrassment was not. Holt stood and turned toward her. "You said you were evaluating us." "I said it depended on how the evaluation went." "That's not an answer." "It was not meant to be." One of the instructors near the observation tower glanced over, but did not intervene. He had received unusual orders that morning. Allow the visitor access, provide no introduction, and do not interrupt unless safety became an issue. He had assumed it was some kind of leadership exercise. Now he was beginning to understand that the test had already started. Holt stepped closer to Evelyn's table. "Let me guess. You used to shoot competitively." Evelyn removed a small cleaning brush from the case. "No, law enforcement." "No, then what?" She ran the brush through the chamber with one smooth motion. "Someone who learned to listen before firing." The answer drew a quiet breath from Mason. Holt heard it. He turned sharply. "You think this is funny?" "No, sir." "Then get back on your rifle." Mason obeyed, but his attention remained on Evelyn. She had noticed something every candidate on the line had missed. The wind near the shooter had been steady, but far downrange, heat shimmer bent in the opposite direction. The dry grass behind the 600-yard marker had flattened a moment before Holt fired. It had been visible, only if someone knew where to look. Holt faced Evelyn again. "You predicted one miss. I corrected one mistake. You didn't correct anything." Evelyn set the cleaning brush down. "You are right." The calm agreement caught him off guard. She looked toward the target. A correction only matters when the shooter is willing to use it. The men nearest the table fell silent. Holt's face hardened. He reached into the ammunition tray and lifted another round. "Fine." He held it up between two fingers. "You want to talk about wind? Call this shot." Evelyn studied the range. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming the sand between the firing line and the target berm. The mirage had grown stronger. A thin haze moved above the ground in uneven layers. "Which target?" she asked. Holt pointed toward a steel plate beyond the one he had just missed. 1200. The range officer looked up immediately. "That lane is not part of today's course." "It's cleared," Holt said. "It's also beyond the standard test distance." Holt ignored him. He looked at Evelyn. "You can read everything from standing back here, right?" Evelyn closed the rifle case halfway, leaving the weapon visible. "No one reads everything." "Then give me your best guess." She turned her eyes toward the far target. For several seconds, she said nothing. The candidates began shifting impatiently. Holt smiled. "Not so easy now." Evelyn raised one hand. The range went still. She watched a strip of fabric tied near the 800-yard marker. It hung motionless. Then she looked farther, toward a patch of pale grass below the target. The grass leaned right, straightened, then leaned again. "Your first correction will be too much," she said. Holt's smile faded. "First correction? You will reduce it after checking the flags." She paused. "But the wind at the target will strengthen while the round is in flight." A candidate behind Mason whispered, "She can't know that." Evelyn continued. "Hold 4/10 left. Elevation 7.6. Fire within the next 8 seconds." Holt looked at his scope. His current settings were nearly identical. He had planned to use 5/10 left. The difference was minor. Small enough to dismiss. Large enough to miss. 7 seconds, Evelyn said. Holt dropped into position. 6. He adjusted the turret. 5. The range officer watched, uncertain whether to stop the shot. 4. Holt pressed his cheek against the stock. 3. His finger moved to the trigger. 2. The rifle cracked. The sound rolled across the cliffs and disappeared toward the distant plate. Everyone waited. A long second passed. Then another. The steel target rang. The impact landed just inside the left edge. Holt looked through the scope. A hit. But barely. Evelyn's eyes remained on the target. You used 5/10. Holt slowly turned toward her. How could you know that? She looked at the mark on the steel. Because 4/10 would have hit the center. This time, no one laughed. The silence lasted longer than Holt could tolerate. He looked from the distant target to Evelyn, then back again. Around him, the candidates avoided meeting his eyes. No one wanted to be the first to say what everyone already understood. She had read the shot better than he had. Not after it happened. Before. Holt stood slowly. That proves nothing. Mason Reed looked up from his rifle. It proves she called the wind. Holt turned on him. Did I ask you? No, sir. Then stay out of it. Mason lowered his eyes, but the damage was done. The challenge was no longer between Holt and a stranger. The entire line had seen him ignore correct advice twice. Evelyn began closing her rifle case. Holt stepped closer. We're not finished. She secured one latch. I am. You walk onto a restricted range, refuse to identify yourself, criticize active candidates, and now you think you can leave? Evelyn looked at his hand. It rested on the edge of her table, too close to the rifle. Move your hand. Her voice had not grown louder, but something in it changed. The candidates nearest them noticed first. Holt did not. Or what? Evelyn met his eyes. Or you will learn the difference between confidence and carelessness. The wind carried the words across the firing line. Holt removed his hand, but only because several people were watching. Then he smiled. It was the kind of smile men used when they felt control slipping away. No. Patch, he said. No visible rank. No active unit. You expect us to treat you like some kind of legend because you guessed 2 wind calls. Evelyn fastened the second latch. I have not asked you to treat me like anything. That's convenient. Holt walked around the table, making sure the others could hear him. Maybe you were good once. Maybe you shot competitions 20 years ago. Maybe someone brought you here to tell old stories. A few candidates shifted uncomfortably. The insults were no longer playful. Holt saw their hesitation and pressed harder. But this is not a veterans reunion. This is a SEAL evaluation. People here earned the right to stand on this line. Evelyn's gaze moved past him to the rifles arranged across the benches. Clean weapons. New equipment. Expensive optics. Men trained to survive pressure. And still, most of them looked away. Did you? She asked. Holt's expression tightened. Did I what? Earn the right. His jaw flexed. I'm first in this class. That was not the question. The range officer took one step forward. Lieutenant, that's enough. Holt ignored him. He pointed toward Evelyn's case. You show up with an old rifle and a classified badge, and everyone is supposed to be impressed? Evelyn looked at the finger aimed toward her. Put your hand down. Holt laughed once. Why? Is the rifle sensitive? No, she stepped closer. The person holding it should be. The line went still again. Mason watched Evelyn's posture change. Only slightly. Her shoulders remained relaxed. Her hands were open. Her weight shifted no more than an inch. But the calm woman who had entered the range was gone. In her place stood someone measuring distance. Timing. Angles. Holt finally sensed it. His hand dropped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then one of the younger candidates near the ammunition table muttered, Who is she? Another answered under his breath. Probably nobody. Holt heard him and seized the opening. Exactly. He turned so the whole line could see him. No name. No unit. No record. Yet she walks in here acting like she owns the range. Evelyn studied him with an expression colder than anger. A name tells you what to call. Someone. She looked toward the target field. A record tells you what survived the paperwork. Then she looked back at Holt. Neither tells you what happened when no one was watching. The words landed differently. The range officer lowered his gaze. Mason felt a chill move through him despite the sun. Holt forced another laugh. That's supposed to scare me? No. Evelyn opened the case again. This time she removed the rifle completely. She set it on the table with the muzzle facing safely downrange. The worn stock carried a series of shallow cuts near the rear grip. Not decorative marks. Not tally lines. Damage. One candidate stared at them. Where did that happen? Evelyn checked the chamber. Somewhere without steel targets. Holt folded his arms. You keep talking like you've seen combat. She looked at him. I keep talking because you keep asking questions you are not ready to hear answered. A warning light flashed near the range tower. The range officer looked toward the control panel. A distant steel target began rising beyond the standard lanes, farther out than any plate used that morning. The electronic display blinked. Distance, 1,840 meters. Wind gusts swept across the sand. Heat shimmer twisted the target until it almost disappeared. The candidates stared. Holt's confidence returned. No one is taking that shot. Evelyn settled the rifle onto the bench. Her fingers moved to the scope. Then no one should have raised the target. For the first time, Holt looked uncertain. Because the unknown woman was no longer preparing to leave. She was preparing to fire. The target stood nearly invisible beyond the heat. At 1,840 meters, it looked less like steel and more like a gray flaw in the air. The plate was narrow, half covered by shimmer rising from the sand. Wind moved across the range in broken layers, strong near the cliffs, weaker through the center, then unpredictable near the target. Holt stared at the display. That lane isn't part of the course. The range officer checked the control panel. It activated under command authorization. Whose command? The officer looked at the screen again. No name appeared. Only a clearance code. Evelyn lowered the rifle onto the shooting mat. The candidates watched her unfold the bipod and press each leg into the ground. She did not rush. She did not ask for a spotter. She did not reach for the digital wind meter sitting beside Holt's station. Mason stepped closer. You're taking it alone? Evelyn looked through the scope. You are never alone on a long shot. Mason frowned. She adjusted the elevation turret. The ground is talking. The heat is talking. The grass is talking. Her eye remained behind the optic. Most shooters are simply too busy listening to themselves. Holt scoffed, but the sound carried less confidence now. That rifle isn't built for this range. Evelyn's fingers stopped. The rifle beneath her was scarred, old, and darkened by years of oil and weather. The stock had been repaired near the rear. The scope lacked the bright digital display mounted on the newer systems. But every part fit her hands. It has been farther, she said. The wind snapped one of the range flags hard to the west. A candidate near the tower checked his handheld meter. 14 miles per hour. Here, Evelyn said. The candidate looked at her. What? That is the wind here. She pointed toward a pale patch of grass 800 meters downrange. Halfway, it drops below 8. Her fingers shifted toward the base of the target. Then it climbs again off the cliff face. Holt shook his head. You can't measure that from here. No. Evelyn settled her shoulder behind the rifle. You learn it. The range officer studied the sky. Visibility is unstable. I can lower the plate. Leave it. The words were quiet, but final. He hesitated. Then he stepped away from the controls. Mason crouched beside Evelyn, careful not to enter her line. What do you need? Observe impact. At that distance, we may not see it. We will. Holt folded his arms. And if you miss? Evelyn adjusted the parallax. Then I correct. That's simple. She glanced at him. The shot is simple. Her eye returned to the scope. Ego makes it complicated. A few men looked down. Holt's face reddened. The range fell silent. Even the instructors stopped moving. Evelyn breathed in slowly. Through the optic, the world narrowed. The cliffs disappeared. The candidates disappeared. The laughter disappeared. There was only distance, pressure, temperature, angle, and time. She watched the target distort through the mirage. The image leaned right, then flattened, then leaned left. She waited. Holt shifted impatiently. What is she doing? Mason did not look at him, waiting for the wind to agree with itself. Evelyn moved the elevation turret one final click. The rifle settled deeper into her shoulder. Her breathing slowed. One inhale, one exhale. Her finger touched the trigger. Then she stopped. A gust crossed the firing line, lifting dust around the benches. Holt smiled. Lost your window. Evelyn remained still. The dust traveled 30 yards, then fell. Farther downrange, the grass remained motionless. Different wind, different layer. She waited 3 more seconds. The target emerged cleanly from the shimmer. Evelyn exhaled. The rifle fired. The report struck the cliffs and rolled back over the range. Dust jumped around the bipod. The recoil pushed into her shoulder, but her eye never left the scope. Everyone stared downrange. 1 second. 2. 3. At that distance, the bullet seemed to vanish into silence. Holt began to smile. Then the steel plate moved. A sharp metallic ring returned across the open ground. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. The range officer looked at the impact monitor. His eyes widened. Hit. No one spoke. Mason leaned toward the screen. Where? The officer enlarged the target image. A fresh mark sat near the upper center of the plate. Not the edge. Not a lucky strike. Center mass. Holt stepped closer to the monitor. That's impossible. Evelyn lifted her face from the stock. No. She opened the bolt and caught the empty casing in her palm. Just difficult. The target display updated. Impact confirmed. Distance, 1,840 meters. First round. The candidates stared at Evelyn as if they were seeing her for the first time. She placed the casing beside the rifle. Then a voice sounded behind them. Range, attention. Every man turned. Commander Nathan Cole stood near the entrance, his eyes fixed on the woman behind the old rifle. For the first time. That morning, Evelyn's expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Cole walked toward her. And with each step, Holt's certainty began to collapse. Commander Nathan Cole crossed the range without looking at anyone else. The candidate snapped to attention as he passed, but his eyes remained fixed on Evelyn. Holt stood beside the impact monitor, still searching for some technical explanation that could make the shot less impossible. A faulty sensor. A pre-marked target. A hidden spotter. Anything except the truth. Evelyn Shaw had placed a first-round hit at 1,840 meters with an old rifle and no electronic support. Cole stopped near the firing mat. His gaze moved to the open bolt, the empty casing on the table, and the fresh mark glowing on the monitor. First round, he asked. The range officer straightened. Yes, sir. Wind call. Independent. Spotter. Only for impact confirmation. Cole gave a small nod. Not surprise. Confirmation. He had seen her make harder shots under worse conditions. Evelyn rose from the mat and brushed the dust from one knee. She lifted the rifle carefully, checked the chamber again, then placed it across the open case. Holt watched the commander. He expected questions. Who authorized her? Why was she on the range? Why had she fired without joining the formal evaluation? Instead, Cole removed his sunglasses. For a moment, the hard expression known across the teams disappeared. What replaced it was quieter, older, the look of a man remembering a place no one else on the range had seen. He stepped directly in front of Evelyn. His boots came together. His shoulders squared. Then Commander Nathan Cole raised his right hand in a precise military salute. The range went completely still. Even the wind seemed to lower its voice. Evelyn looked at him for one measured second. Then she returned the salute. Commander Cole. Her voice was calm, but no longer distant. Master Chief Shaw, Cole replied. It has been a long time. Holt's face lost its color. Master Chief. The title moved through the candidates in silent recognition. This was not a contractor. Not a former competitive shooter. Not an aging visitor who had wandered onto the wrong range. Mason Reed stared at the worn rifle, then at the woman who had carried it through the gate without a single visible symbol of authority. Cole lowered his hand. I wasn't told when you would arrive. That was intentional. I assumed it was. A faint understanding passed between them. Holt stepped forward. Sir. Cole turned his head. The single movement stopped him. Lieutenant. Holt straightened. Sir, we were not informed that she was part of the evaluation. No, Cole said. You were not. His eyes moved across the entire firing line. That was the evaluation. Several candidates exchanged uneasy looks. Cole walked toward the impact monitor and examined the digital image of the target. Master Chief Shaw was asked to assess more than your ability to hit steel. He looked at Holt. She was asked to assess judgment. Then at the others. Discipline. Awareness. Conduct under uncertainty. His gaze returned to Evelyn's rifle. And whether this unit has learned the difference between confidence and arrogance. No one moved. The words settled over the range with more force than the gunshot. Holt swallowed. Sir, I only challenged her because she refused to identify herself. Evelyn closed one latch on the case. You challenged me before you asked. Holt opened his mouth, then stopped. He remembered his first words. Who let the museum tour in? The laughter. The comments about her age. The way he had placed his hand beside her rifle and demanded proof that she belonged. Cole faced him fully. What did you observe when she entered? Holt hesitated. No visible rank, sir. That is what she wore. What did you observe? Holt looked toward the ground. Cole waited. Mason answered quietly. She checked the tower, the wind lanes, the target field, and the exits. Cole looked at him. What else? She carried the rifle herself. She knew the range layout before anyone explained it. She called 2 wind shifts before the flag showed them. Cole nodded once. Good. Then he looked back at Holt. You saw the absence of a patch and decided it meant the absence of experience. Holt stood rigid. Yes, sir. Cole turned toward Evelyn. Do they know? No, should they? Evelyn looked across the candidates. Some appeared ashamed. Some were confused. Mason looked genuinely curious. Holt looked like a man waiting for judgment. Not everything, she said. Cole accepted that. He faced the line again. Master Chief Evelyn Shaw served as lead sniper and field instructor for a joint special operations element whose records remain classified. The candidates listened without breathing. She trained operators from 3 branches. She wrote parts of the long-range field doctrine you studied before arriving here. Mason slowly looked toward the manual lying beside his rifle. Cole continued. And years ago, in a valley none of you will find on a public mission map, she held an enemy position long enough for 12 operators to come home. He paused. I was one of them. The meaning of the salute became clear. It had not been offered because of rank alone. It had been earned in smoke, distance, and a moment when Cole's life had depended on the woman Holt had called nobody. Evelyn secured the final latch on the rifle case. Holt stepped toward her. This time, there was no swagger in his movement. Only shame. Master Chief, she looked at him. He struggled to find words strong enough to undo what he had said. But before he could speak, Evelyn lifted one hand. Save the apology. Holt froze. She looked toward the firing line. You still have an evaluation to finish. Her eyes returned to him. And now you understand what is actually being tested. Holt lowered his eyes. The apology remained trapped behind his teeth. Evelyn did not wait for it. She carried the rifle case to the nearest table and opened it again, this time with less ceremony. The candidates watched in silence as she removed the weapon and laid it across the mat. Now that Commander Cole had named her, every scratch seemed different. The worn stock no longer looked neglected. It looked traveled. The dents near the scope mount were no longer signs of age. They were evidence. Mason Reed stepped closer, careful to remain outside her space. Master Chief, he said, was that the rifle from the valley? Cole looked at Evelyn. She said nothing for several seconds. Then she turned the rifle slightly. Near the bottom of the stock, beneath a layer of dark finish, a narrow line of engraving became visible. One shot for those who never came home. The words were small enough to miss unless someone knew where to look. Mason read them twice. Holt stopped breathing for a moment. The range officer removed his cap. Evelyn ran one finger over the engraving. This rifle belonged to a man named Aaron Voss, she said. He was my first team leader. Her voice remained controlled, but the distance in it changed. He taught me that a sniper's job was not to collect impossible shots. She looked toward the far target. It was to create a way home. No one interrupted. Cole stood beside her, his expression fixed on the old weapon. Voss was killed before the Valley operation, he said quietly. Evelyn's hand became still. The candidates understood then. The rifle was not a trophy. It was a promise. Holt looked at the scratches near the rear of the stock. What happened there? Evelyn studied him. For the first time, his question held no challenge. Only respect. Rock fragments, she said. The hide collapsed after the 3rd mortar strike. A few candidates looked toward Cole. He nodded. The extraction route was gone, he said. Communications were failing. We had wounded men pinned below a ridge, and enemy fire controlling the only pass. Evelyn closed the bolt halfway, then opened it again. A quiet habit. A memory carried through metal. Cole continued. Command believed the team would have to wait until dark. His gaze moved to Evelyn. She disagreed. Holt swallowed. What did she do? Cole answered without looking away from her. She crossed open ground alone, established a position above the pass, and began removing every threat that moved toward the wounded. The men on the range remained silent. There was no excitement in Cole's voice. No attempt to turn the memory into legend. That made it heavier. How long? Mason asked. For hours, Cole said. Evelyn corrected him. 3 hours and 42 minutes. Cole gave the faintest smile. She remembers numbers. I remember ammunition. The smile disappeared. 21 rounds, she continued. 20. Confirmed impacts. 1 deliberate miss. Holt frowned. Why miss deliberately? Evelyn looked at him. To move the last shooter. Mason understood first. You forced him from cover. She nodded. Cole's team needed 6 seconds. Cole folded his arms. She gave us 9. The candidates looked at Evelyn differently now. Not as a myth. As a professional who had measured lives in seconds and cartridges. Holt glanced at the fresh casing from the 1,840-meter shot. You saved 12 men. Evelyn looked toward Cole. 12 men walked out. That is not the same answer, Holt said. No, her voice softened by a fraction. It is the accurate one. The range went quiet again. Beyond the firing line, the distant plate still swayed slightly in the wind. Mason looked at the blank space on Evelyn's field jacket where a patch should have been. Why remove your insignia? Evelyn closed the rifle case. Because I wanted to know what you saw without it. No one needed the explanation repeated. A rank could force attention. A record could produce fear. A famous name could create obedience. But none of those things revealed character. Cole stepped toward the candidates. The Master Chief's identity was restricted from your briefing for a reason. He looked from one face to the next. A sniper can be taught wind formulas. A candidate can memorize distance tables. A leader can improve physical scores. His eyes stopped on Holt. But judgment appears before the first shot. Holt stood straighter. Not defensively this time. Understood, sir. Evelyn lifted the case by its handle. No, she said. Every eye turned toward her. You heard him. She walked to the center of the line. Understanding comes next. She pointed toward the firing stations. Unload every rifle. The candidates immediately obeyed. Magazines came free. Bolts opened. Chambers were checked. Evelyn waited until the range officer confirmed the line was safe. Then she looked at Holt. You are no longer first in the class. His face tightened, but he did not argue. Master Chief, am I being removed? No, the answer surprised everyone. You are being given another chance. She turned toward Mason. You saw details. But you stayed silent until it became safe to speak. Mason lowered his head. Yes, Master Chief. To the rest of you. Some laughed. Some watched. Some knew it was wrong and decided it was not their problem. Her gaze moved across the line. No anger. No accusation. Only assessment. In the field, silence is also a decision. The words struck harder than punishment. Evelyn placed the case beside the observation table. Your marksmanship evaluation is over. Holt looked confused. What happens now? She faced the gate leading toward the coastal training grounds. Now we find out whether any of you can be trusted when the target shoots back. A warning siren sounded once from the tower. Not an emergency. A training signal. Beyond the range, armored vehicles began moving toward the hills. Cole put on his sunglasses. The candidates stared at Evelyn. The unknown woman had become a Master Chief. The old rifle had become a battlefield relic. And the morning test they thought they had failed was only the beginning. The armored vehicles stopped beyond the southern ridge. Engines idled beneath the wind as the candidates assembled near the gate, carrying training rifles and packs. The firing range behind them had fallen quiet. The steel targets no longer mattered. Evelyn stood in front of the formation. No one laughed now. Holt occupied the second row instead of the first. His uniform was still perfect. His posture was still sharp. But the confidence he had worn that morning had changed into something heavier. Awareness. Commander Cole handed Evelyn a sealed exercise folder. She opened it, read the first page, then closed it again. Your objective is simple, she said. Reach the observation point, identify the threat position, and extract without being detected. One candidate glanced toward the steep hills. How long do we have? Evelyn looked at him. Until you make a mistake. No one asked another question. She divided them into teams and assigned Holt to Mason's group. Holt looked surprised. Mason looked even more surprised. Evelyn noticed both reactions. Lieutenant Holt, you will not lead. Holt's jaw tightened. Yes, Master Chief. Petty Officer Reed will. Mason straightened. Yes, Master Chief. Evelyn stepped closer to them. One of you sees too little because he thinks he already knows enough. Her eyes shifted to Mason. The other sees more than most, but waits too long to speak. She looked between them. Today, you will either correct each other or fail together. The gate opened. The teams moved into the hills. For the next 3 hours, Evelyn watched from an elevated observation point beside Commander Cole. Through binoculars, they tracked the candidates as they crossed dry gullies, climbed rock shelves, and navigated between hidden sensors. Holt's group advanced quickly at first. Too quickly. Near the second ridge, Holt raised a hand and pointed toward a narrow passage. Fastest route. Mason studied the ground. Something about the path bothered him. The dust was too clean. The grass near the rocks had been pressed down. He hesitated. That morning, he would have stayed silent. This time he spoke. Possible ambush lane. Holt looked at him. For one brief second, pride returned to his face. Then he remembered the firing range. He lowered his hand. Show me. Mason pointed toward a faint reflection above the ridge. A concealed camera. Had they entered the passage, the team would have failed. Holt nodded. Alternate route. No argument. No insult. They moved west and reached the observation point without triggering the sensor. From the ridge above, Evelyn lowered her binoculars. Cole glanced at her. Progress. One decision, she said. That is how it starts. By late afternoon, the candidates returned to the range covered in dust and sweat. Two teams had failed. One had been detected crossing open ground. Another had lost contact with a rear security man. Holt and Mason's team completed the exercise, but not perfectly. They had moved too slowly during extraction and missed a secondary threat marker. Still, they returned together. Evelyn stood beside the table where the old rifle case remained closed. She reviewed each team without raising her voice. She described their mistakes in exact detail. No humiliation. No excuses. When she reached Holt's group, she looked at Mason first. You spoke. Yes, Master Chief. Earlier than before. Yes, Master Chief. Then she faced Holt. You listened. He met her eyes. Yes, Master Chief. Was it difficult? Holt took a breath. Yes. Several candidates looked at him. He continued. Because I thought accepting correction made me look weak. Evelyn waited. What do you think now? That ignoring it makes everyone weaker. The answer settled over the formation. Evelyn gave a small nod. Holt stepped forward. Master Chief, permission to speak. Granted. He stood at attention. This morning, I judged you before I knew anything about you. I mocked your rifle, questioned your place here, and treated your silence like weakness. He looked briefly toward the others. They followed my example. No one moved. That was my failure. Evelyn studied him. Why are you apologizing? Holt hesitated. Because I was wrong. That is part of it. He searched for the rest. Then his eyes moved toward Mason. Because my judgment could have taught this team to ignore the wrong person at the wrong time. Evelyn's expression softened by a fraction. Better. She picked up the shot card from Holt's first miss and handed it to him. The correction she had warned him about was still marked beside the wind data. Keep this. Holt accepted it. As punishment. As a reminder. He looked down at the card. Evelyn faced the full formation. Confidence helps you act when others freeze. Her gaze moved from one candidate to the next. But confidence without discipline becomes noise. Skill without judgment becomes danger. Rank without character becomes fear. No one looked away. She rested one hand on the old rifle case. You asked who I was. The wind moved gently across the empty range. That was the wrong question. She pointed toward the men standing beside one another. When the lights fail, communications disappear, and the person next to you is the only thing standing between your team and disaster. Ask something more important. She paused. Can they be trusted? Commander Cole stepped forward. The candidates straightened. He looked at Evelyn, then raised his hand once more. This time, every candidate on the range followed him. Holt saluted. Mason saluted. The men who had laughed saluted. Evelyn stood before them in her faded jacket, without visible medals, without ceremony, and without asking for recognition. Then she returned the salute. Not because they had finally learned her name, because they had finally begun to understand what it meant to earn respect. The following morning, Evelyn arrived at the range before sunrise. Holt was already there. He was checking the wind. Mason stood beside him. This time, neither man was speaking. They were listening. Evelyn placed her rifle case on the table. 2 quiet clicks opened the latches. The lesson continued. Respect had not been demanded. It had been earned.